Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you all very much for joining us today. We will start the program with a recitation of Quran from Muhammad Yusuf. Let's welcome Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لقد كان في يوسف وإخوته آيات للسائلين إذ قالوا لا يوسف وحقه أحب إلى أبينا منا ونحن أصبع إن أبانا لفي ضلال مبين اقتلوا يوسف أو اطرحوه أرضا يخل لكم وجه أبيكم وتكونوا من بعده قوما صالحين قال قائل منهم لا تقتلوا يوسف وألقوه في غيابة الجب يلتقطه بعض السيارة إن كنتم فاعلين.
Thank you very much for the recitation. We're now very fortunate to have Dr. Fella Lahmar, who will be speaking to us on a talk entitled Getting Through Together, Islamic Education Values for Challenging Times. Dr. Lahmar is the course leader for the Islamic Education New Perspectives program at the Markfield Institute for Higher Education. She's worked as a research associate at the University of Nottingham, examining the complexities of international and transnational higher education and its link to politics in different contexts. She obtained her PhD in education from the University of Nottingham in 2012, where she explored the diversity and development in Muslim schools in Britain. And she's taught in a number of different Muslim schools here in England and in Saudi Arabia, and has a keen interest in interdisciplinary research combining Western Islamic theoretical approaches to engage with the emerging issues of her research and interest and expertise. So let's welcome her, Fulla, with Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Mr. Fulla. Dr. Fulla. You're on mute, so if you could unmute yourself, sorry.
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be with you today, and as well to hear the beautiful verses from Little Angel. So today, inshallah, we'll discuss, as you said, getting through together, and we will explore the Islamic education values, especially in the challenging times. In doing that, I will explore the approaches to Islamic education. We'll go through them very briefly, and then we'll go to analyze the values based on Islamic education, values and society based on Surah Youcef. So I'm pleased to hear the verses that being recited at the beginning. We'll discuss spiritual freedom and freedom, authority, and responsibility, and what do they mean really for Muslims, especially in these challenging times. So if we go to approaches in Islamic education, and that's Al-Azhar in there as a symbol for Islamic education, we find the the key approaches, the four key approaches, whether from fiqh approaches, the juristic school presented Muhammad ibn Sahnoun, but with others as well. You will find some of the writings in different authors writing about that. The philosophical approach, you'll find Ibn Miskawayh, but you can find as well in Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi. You'll find it scattered elsewhere as well from a philosophical approach. You'll find as well the Sufi approach. You find a lot in Abu Hamd al-Ghazali and others, and the social approach to Islamic education, and that is analyzed in Ibn Khaldun and his approach, the sociological approach to analysis in his introduction. Now, if we look for Islamic education across those different approaches, you'll find some underpinning assumptions that are taken as believed for as basis for Islamic education. The creator and the relationship of the human being and the creator is ibadah. So as Muslims, the relationship, the basis for the Islamic education is ibadah. Also, the universe, the relationship of the human being and the universe is taskhir, which is based on the verse, do you not see that Allah has made subject to you, sakhara lakum, and the taskhir here is created by Allah and is for us, so we have to look after this universe. Amongst people, the relationship amongst people is the adl, justice, and ihsan, good, to do good to others the perfect way, as perfect, as good as possible. And with life, the relationship of the Muslim with life is ibtila, and tests and struggles in life. So this life is not paradise, is not perceived as paradise. And the belief in the hereafter, so there is the part of the human being in this life and the part which is in the hereafter, and that also takes with it a responsibility and accountability. So those are kind of foundations for when we talk about Islamic education before we go into any other detail. Then we have as well across the different approaches from different perspectives, but there is the prophethood, that the prophets, they have a mission, and that mission entails teaching others, and they are the most qualified of all to engage in ijtihad, interpretation of the divine message. How can the character of an effective Islamic education, educational shaped in a pluralistic or globalized context? This we can study it from different, we can read the different prophets dealing with their people. Islamic education values for challenging times, that is what we will focus today, inshallah. When we are dealing with society, and we are kind of reflecting tafakkur on the life of the prophets in terms of pedagogy, we are looking for the missions that are mentioned in the Quran. We find the tilawa, that the prophet is ordered to yatlu, means recitation, or also means to follow, because you'll find والشمس والقمر إذا تلاها, that al-qamar is following the sun. And in this case, you can mean to follow in terms of physically following it, or in terms of following it by reflection of its light. This is all kind of meaning. So the tilawa is recitation, but also what is beyond recitation. At-tazkiyah, part of Islamic education is tazkiyah, purification, because we purify, as we purify money with zakah, we purify the nafs through the program of tazkiyah, and this will lead to growth, blessing, praise. All those are kind of meanings to the word tazkiyah, and all those are part of the education based on Islamic perspective. So if we find tabligh also as a mission to the prophets, they have to do tabligh. And balagha, someone balagha, the destination means reaches, or to arrive at their destination, or to ballagh al-risala, so to notify someone with a message, or to reach your destination, or to accomplish is accomplishment of your goal. This is all kind of tabligh of your of the message. Also al-bayan, this is part of the mission to the prophets, al-bayan, the clarification and to reveal the message. But how this could be done in real life with the prophets, this is where we can explore this. So Islamic education values here and society, we'll find first the fundamental British values, which all Muslim schools, as parts of the system, they have to teach, and to do with democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, mutual respect, tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs, I'm not going to explore those kind of fundamental British values of whether they are shared with other societies, not necessarily British, and what is British, specifically British about them, and what is shared about them. But let us take some of them and we explore how these are linked to the values underpinning Islamic education based on our reading of Surah Youcef. So I take Surah Youcef as an example, and this example because I find in it first the challenging time and the challenging circumstances to the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, and I find in it as well the tawhid in terms of the oneness of Allah, la ilaha illallah, or the tawhid of the different parts of the human being, means the people, the person, being in their natural and physical needs, and also their spiritual aspects and their spiritual developments and growth. So the Surah Youcef presents to us this kind of wahda, of unity in the human being as a role model, as an example in which both the natural and physical needs and as well as the spiritual needs are fulfilled, but also the struggles of life. As we've mentioned before, life has struggles and its tests. So we've seen that as well in Surah Youcef, but we've seen as well challenging times with non-Muslim society, in non-Muslim society. We find in Surah Youcef here, first freedom, and the second freedom. The first freedom, spiritual freedom. And that spiritual freedom between the believers and their Lord. We see there in Surah Youcef, Yusuf detached from his dad, was sent away, so he was not in that family of prophethood. He was in a foreign society, away from his religious community, but his spiritual kind of spiritual dedication, spiritual freedom supports him throughout those struggles. So what do we mean by spiritual freedom here? How do we achieve direct relationship here? That's what it meant. Direct relationship of the believers to their Lord. So we are not into somebody to bring you closer. You can ask the dua like Yusuf alayhi salam, and his Lord was with him throughout. And also the second is political freedom, and this is the vertical one, top, between the citizens and the authority, the power in the society. So we can find Yusuf alayhi salam as being a citizen, and also as being the ruler as well, and in a status of authority. So from the status of a vulnerable, being a slave, being imprisoned, being then moving to the state of power, and we try to see how his spiritual freedom helped him throughout to deal with society and to deal with those kind of challenges. We see here throughout there was also elements of knowledge throughout Surah Youcef, emphasis of knowledge to go through kind of such a journey, and also wisdom, where or kind of wisdom in a sense of a taste, is a sense of etiquette, in a sense of reading culture in depth and reading the essence of the cultural context and decide based on that on what is the best action to take in certain circumstances. So you find the cultural influences we notice in Surah Youcef, the slavery, the customs, even the food customs and how this food is being served and for what purposes, and communication and hierarchy of society and classes. And we find the family relationships and how they are broken and how they are fixed. And we find the women and prejudice about women at certain times. Also, we find natural influences, opportunities like being saved from the well, or being, someone remembered the dream and called him back to the palace. We find also some of the emerging values of education that emerged in Surah Youcef. we find beauty, al-jamal. Al-jamal here, the beauty is reflected in the beauty of the physical and also the beauty of the action. So, and that is the artistic side of it as well throughout Surah Yusuf. You see how Yusuf, how the physical, how Yusuf alayhi salam was not only evaluated by the physical appearance, but also by the beauty of his actions. Also, we find rizq, the concept of rizq, and what is the underpinning value of rizq and livelihood and sustenance for if we take all those elements as elements for Islamic education. So how can we nurture that, or how can we plan the curriculum, or how can we teach, or how can this be relevant to society? Knowledge and ilm, the importance of knowledge and ilm, and also values of authority. So knowledge in which way, if someone has knowledge, to use it, how to gain it. Also the authority and power and the values, how to use authority and how to use power. A question that we may ask, especially relevant to the youth in non-Muslim context, what prevented Yusuf alayhi salam from deviating away from his principles, even though he was not restricted with the cultural norms? He was far away. He was actually pressed to break his values and to get into some actions that contradict his values, but he rejected. So what makes him as dedicated to his values as he did? Also, he could be segregating himself easily to preserve his values, but he was at the heart of society, and then he was there at the top of society. So we see here the values of aesthetic beauty, we see the values of economy, we see the values of family, for family and social interactions, we see the values related to knowledge of dream interpretation, and we see some practical skills, practical values, and some skills to lead at the state policy and being dedicated to justice in society and saving lives. We find then the relationships here are having two dimensions. The one dimension, the vertical relationship from top to bottom, the power, the authority, and the rizq, and how the rizq is being planned and distributed. And also we find the horizontal relationship, and in the horizontal relationship with people we find love. We find love in all its meanings. We find love with family, we find love with carers, we find love with authorities, we find love with you find the sexual issues as well there, and their complexities, and we find love towards society and saving lives of society. So love is all there around Yusuf alayhi salam. The understanding values and cultural norms as well. So the wise action, informed planning, and knowledge and action. The spiritual freedom. If we are asking as in education about spirituality, we have to ask ourselves, as part of our reflection, as part of our tazkiyah, as we've mentioned before, as part of our growth, as part of our purification, who are we when we are alone? This is the true version of ourselves when we are alone. Are we free? What do we choose when we feel like we are free? We see Yusuf alayhi salam in the surah when he's saying وَلَقَدْ هَمَّتْ بِهِ وَهَمَّ بِهَا لَوْلَا أَن رَأَى بُرْهَانَ رَبِّهِ كَذَلِكَ لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوءَ وَالْفَحْشَاءَ إِنَّهُ مِنْ عِبَادِنَا الْمُخْلَصِينَ. And she certainly determined to seduce him, and he would have inclined to her had he not seen the proof of his Lord. And I stop here. I will not going into the different tafsirs of what proof of his Lord and what types and all sorts of tafsirs on that. I will just say that Yusuf alayhi salam he found in himself connection with his Lord, that he saw the signs that he should not do that, he should not go down that road. And that kind of spiritual experience, spiritual freedom to Yusuf alayhi salam, that made the decision not to go into such an action and to run away from all the from the situation, despite the end to prison. So that is what we call spiritual freedom. That even if it ends into imprisonment, but still that kind of freedom gives the satisfaction to the self, and gives the self itself, based on the self's values rather than the society and cultural restrictions and pressure. We find as well the power and will. We may ask this question on power and will, and I'm not going into the debate, the traditional debate of free will and whether we have free will or not have free will, and theological debates about that. But what I'm interested in is not the theological debate, is how this will link to the educational goals and outcomes when we talk about power and will. What can I do as a believer? Can I change things in myself and around me? Can I do something about it, about my circumstances if I'm not happy about them? Can I do something to help society like Yusuf alayhi salam did? You find here the verse, indeed Allah will not change the condition of people until they change what is in themselves. So here becomes the question about self-control, and the previous verse of Yusuf alayhi salam, that when he saw the sign and the proof of his Lord and the connection and his spirituality and thinking about accountability in the hereafter, you find then the self-control of the self. There are desires to this, for the self, but can we have self-control over ourselves? Do we need knowledge? Of course, we need that knowledge, and this is part of will and power. So with knowledge, will and power, and self-control. Then we find here the spiritual freedom, and in circumstances when, like the Yusuf alayhi salam in prison, difficult circumstances, yet for him, his mission of change, his mission towards society, it doesn't come to an end because he's in prison. He saw himself as mission, as based on his values towards himself and towards others around him, but based on ihsan, and ihsan to do good towards to yourself and to others. So doing good to himself, was he preferred imprisonment over being in the palace with all the luxuries that would break his values. So for him, freedom and dignity and self-respect is better achieved in a prison rather than in the palace. But also in the prison doesn't mean imprisonment of action. So he saw that he could do something in prison. And when you find himself in prison, the conversation straight away, building good relationship with his mates in prison, and he starts those conversations. You find the evidence in his mates when they said to him, "Inform us of its interpretation. Indeed, we see you to be of those who do good." So, and I would just sit down and think what Yusuf alayhi salam did for them, that they saw him, they evaluated his action as doing good, as someone to be of those who do good. We remember the same evaluation from his brothers later on when they did not know that he was Yusuf. So the impression that Yusuf alayhi salam created in his non-Muslim society is impression of goodness, is impression of ihsan towards others, whether he was in a palace or whether he was in imprisonment or whether he was the ruler in a state of authority. That value of ihsan never left him. You find towards society, if we are dealing with society, especially in these circumstances now, like with we have now at the moment with COVID-19, we have to ask about necessities, and people around us, our neighbors, our communities. Do they have the basic necessities? Are they satisfied? Because we have even we think in education, if we take this in education, we have to ask Islamic education in terms of what to provide for society in terms of necessities and basic needs. And Islamic education is not only about preaching, and is not about the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is fundamental in its and underpinning all the values of Islamic education in ibadah, but also the asking the questions around justice, around poverty, around the priorities in times, our duties towards the society around us. So we have in sort Quraysh, who has fed them, الذي أطعمهم من جوع, saving them from hunger, and made them safe, saving them from fear. Those are basic needs that gives kind of a foundation to dignity and humanity. Before we go further and discuss other issues, someone who's hungry, dying from hunger, we need first to care for the necessities and satisfy their basic needs. And this reminds me with maqasid al-sharia, which is, I'm not going to go who said what, but we find this in mainstream when discussing maqasid al-sharia, especially necessities. We find the preserving of faith, or soul and wealth, mind, offspring, and honor, than the debate about other issues. But let us say at the level of necessities. So necessities, even in Sharia, even in Islamic law, even in halal and haram, they are considered. And in society, if we take in education, if we take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we find as well the physiological needs are at the bottom, and they are the necessities for learners. So if we are dealing with society as well, in times of poverty, in times of calamities, in times of pandemic, like now, periods, what can we offer to society? How can we do that as part of the generation when we are talking, future generations, we are talking about Islamic education, before we go to the other top level of luxuries or self-actualization, as we find in Maslow's hierarchy of needs? We find in the Quran, we're dealing with society, we have a basis. That basis is diversity, acknowledgement of the diversity that exists, and also knowledge and virtue, ma'ruf. And you find in here in يا أيها الذين آمنوا يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا. O mankind, indeed we have created you from male and female and made you peoples and tribes that you may know one another. So it's about knowing others, getting into contact with others, is not isolating ourselves from society and from communities to preserve our faith. Part of preserving faith is actually to move that faith from theory to action. And part of the responsibilities are the responsibility towards our neighbors, towards our communities. So we have to ask ourselves, what have we done towards our communities? And this should be in the planning of Islamic education, should be in the planning of curriculum, should be in the planning of lessons, and also in the pedagogy. What type of pedagogy do we choose to use in our classes, and for what purpose? Here, لِتَعَارَفُوا is not only to know one another, we can also take the word literally to more meanings of ma'ruf, to do good to others around us. So it's not to isolate around. And in this verse, we find ذَكَرٍ وَأُنْثَى, so male and female is not mentioning, and شعوب وقبائل, so no discrimination based on race or discrimination. Is all of us, we actually diversity is to be celebrated in here, and not to be a kind of a source of discrimination. We find also the fraternity here, that we are all from one soul. And from one soul, there is no discrimination then based on race, because we go to the first source, or the first womb. All of us are from the same kind of womb. And then we have the specific womb, which is based, then you come to races, and you go to families, and you go to, but if we go back, you'll find the overall and the source that we are equal. We came from one nafs, we came from one self, and this will help dealing, if we're taking those issues of equality, those issues of brotherhood, of justice, equality, thinking about humanity as a family, and thinking about the sub-families in that way can transform our understanding in dealing with others in our societies who are different from us. We have also the value of freedom, authority, and responsibility. And freedom here, talking about self-control, which I already mentioned before. And this is an example of self-control. For the first one was self-control against self-desires. When the woman of Al-Aziz called him and pushed him and oppressed him, yet he had that self-control to say no because of the spiritual freedom that he gained through his relationship with his Lord. And here is another desire, strong desire, to oppress others or to deviate from values, the desire of authority and of power, and what to do with power. At the time when Yusuf alayhi salam was in power, and you find his brothers are actually saying bad things about him, that he was a thief himself, that about his brother, if he steals or a brother of his has stolen before. But Yusuf alayhi salam here kept it within himself and did not reveal it to them. So he was acting based on justice and based on fairness and not self-revenge. So he was not taking the authority here to oppress others. Even when he has the right to punish, he did not. And he kept it in himself. And this requires a lot of discipline and tazkiyah and growth in the self to be able to control it and not to abuse power. Also, we have the sense of ihsan. If we see his brothers, they say, indeed, we see you as a doer of good. So they appreciated him in a self, in authority, that he was doing good in authority without recognizing that he was their brother. So we see here, ihsan is a value that should go along even with those who oppressed us or did bad to us, but then how to bring the justice and fairness. This is the requires wisdom, as Yusuf alayhi salam did. He did not use, as I said, power and authority to revenge, and therefore we have to think about concepts of power and concepts of authority and concepts of freedom when we think about Islamic education and concepts of justice. Those concepts are not theoretical concepts. They are directly linked, as we see in Surah Youcef, they are directly linked to our day-to-day actions. And from Islamic point of view, we know that action is something we have, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blamed those who say things but they don't act upon them. And he said that, the action we have in Surah Shu'ara, وَالشُّعَرَاءُ يَتَّبِعُهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَهِيمُونَ. And the poets, only the deviators follow them. Do you not see that in every valley they roam, and that they say what they do not do? So they are blamed not because they are saying poetry, because then you find the exception later on. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Except those who believe and those who are doing, they are acting upon their belief. And we know that in the Seerah we find some of the poets praised by the Prophet, peace be upon him. So it's not about poetry, it's not about art by itself or per se. It's about saying things and not acting upon what we say. And this is what is blamed. So there are the actions of the limbs and there are the actions of the hearts. And this is where you find this verse later on, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لِمَ تَقُولُونَ مَا لَا تَفْعَلُونَ. Oh, you who have believed, why do you say what you do not do? So it's about how can we transform, when we plan for Islamic education, to be an education to action, and not to do education for the sake of theorizing things. We need to understand, we need knowledge, we need will, and we need action with that will. And that is in society, we know now from Surah Youcef, those kind of values, how those to be translated into society, into action, because great is hatred in the sight of Allah, that you say what you do not do. And what we do should be with ihsan, as Yusuf alayhi salam with ihsan, whether against his own desires of physical or against the authority and power. And when he took the leadership in Egypt, as we know, he took it with knowledge, and he did not, revenge. He did not revenge against his brothers, but also he did not revenge against the society, those who imprisoned him, and he was innocent. In both cases, he was with ihsan, and he was thinking how to change things to a fair society and to save lives, and to serve the necessities of people at a time of difficulty. So, as a conclusion, I would say the human being, the Islamic education value is based on the human being as a Khalifa on earth. And when I say Khalifa, I mean here all those values are part of being a Khalifa. Is actually not the authority and power, is what to do to make this world better. The value of istikhlaf has the spiritual dimension and has the moral dimension. The moral dimensions are underpinning all our actions. Freedom and responsibility are parts of that. And if the human being succeeds, then he has combined the nature of man between being a natural, physical, with all their limitations and desires in history, and post-natural in terms of the hereafter and the morals and the metaphysical nature of this human being. These are some of the points I've seen that as being relevant to our circumstances. Wallahu a'lam, jazakumullahu khairan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fella, and thank you for going through that in detail, and your thoughts that you've put forward. I know that you didn't want to get into that much detail about British values, but and the questions about whether they are indeed British values or broader. But can I just ask your thoughts on that question itself? In particular, what we have right now is we're trying to understand how, as Muslims here in this country, with all the values that you have articulated about, which you've talked about from Surah Youcef-An and others, are very relevant to us today. And in an independent way, the government obviously has put what it considers to be British values as part of the driving system, or driving the way that the people get taught here. What do you think, if you were to sort of just pick things out, what would you say are the biggest things that we as Muslims can contribute? Like, if you were to say, what is the specific thing that we are able to contribute in terms of the values that we think are important in education, which aren't there right now? What do you think is the specific thing that we could, of all the things that you've talked about, what do you think is the summary, most important thing that we can give? And on the other side, what do you think of the values that are there? What do you think is wrong, if there is anything wrong, with the way that the government has put out, these are the values that we currently have in education? So what do you think is the worst of what's currently there, and what do you think is the best of what we can offer?
I think the best we can offer is to act according to the value of ihsan towards oneself and towards those around us and towards society, in all aspects. So in when I say in all aspects, is not only in the masjid, beyond the masjid, in the community. What can we do to make the lives of people around us better? And this will touch upon the different points in there. So when we are involved with society, with ihsan, you have the mutual respect with society, and we have, when you have true liberty and freedom, you are as well to grow, and you have that kind of growth. So I would say there is responsibility towards society in large to bring the ihsan concept in every field, whenever. So if the doctor is having that kind of responsibility in there, or a teacher, or any one of us has to think as this is my society, these are my people, as the prophets prophets used to address their people, our people. So those are our people, and therefore what can we contribute as being citizens, free citizens in the society, to deal with that. The problem I see with fundamental British values is actually making them as the discourse of presenting those values was problematic, because the discourse was presented as us and them, as those who came from abroad having different foreign values from us, and us here we have kind of these values, as if those values are restricted to certain people and others are excluded from them, and they have to learn them, and they will remain as foreigners to those values because they are learners. And what I'm trying to say in here, there are values that are inherent within the Muslim, within the Quranic values, in teaching, in dealing with our societies and where we live. So it's not about foreign values and we're trying to adopt those values. Those values are already practiced there, and they are shared with other communities and societies, making them as uniquely British. This is the issue and the problem I find.
Thank you. One of the questions that have come through is, do you think that freedom or liberty should be looked as something that stands above everything, or is it secondary in Islam? Is the individual's liberty something which is an absolute value, or is it a restricted value in an Islamic framework of education?
The question of freedom is always complex, and always has its kind of limitations, because what do we mean by absolute freedom? Is there something called absolute freedom? Even if you take Hayy ibn Yaqdhan, for instance, and his kind of story, and in the isolated island, and being free completely from other societies and pressures of societies and values of societies. And the philosophies, they're presenting him as if they're free, but also there are limitations of the physical, limitations of the desire. Even if that intellect will reach a certain level, as in Hayy ibn Yaqdhan, to reach and to know the Creator, still we have kind of desires, and those desires can be limitations to our own kind of freedom from within us. So when we say freedom from an Islamic perspective, that's why I put at the beginning the slide there on fundamentals of tawhid. So we have the freedom is based from an Islamic perspective in education, based on these values. So the ibadah is free within the framework of ibadah, and this is what it means. You know, if someone is from an Islamic framework, the spirituality, the tawhid, the relationship with Allah, would free the person from the limitations, from the pressures of society, and from the limitations of the self. So within, even if there are struggles, and even if there are many limitations around, from within the person is feeling the freedom, and that freedom will make decisions based on their own values. So it's not an absolute freedom, because I don't believe there is an absolute freedom. Even in our societies, when we are free, we have responsibilities, and we need to create rules and laws, and those laws to restrict some freedoms in order to get the dignity and to get the respect and to get to be able to live together. So in this case, whether within Islam or outside Islam, there is always limitation. There are always limitations to freedom, but we have to choose the framework. And within Islam is the framework of ibadah. So if the relationship with you are only a servant to your Lord, once you accept this servitude and you are a servant to your Lord, then you are free from any slavery beyond that. So you are free from, Yusuf alayhi salam was a slave physically, in body was a slave, but he was free spiritually, and that's why he could make his own kind of decisions and reject the power and reject the restrictions of the palace and the desires of the self, to say no or to say yes and lead the country.
Thank you. Just someone was following up from that. They've asked a question.
Yep.
So whilst you make the claim that Islam has these same the values that you've called we call the British values, but the way that you've explained it, you've interpreted freedom in a very different way to what the British value understanding of freedom is. So then, in reality, are these values, these so-called British values, are they really universal? Actually, what you're saying is they're not, because the way that you've interpreted freedom is very different to how the British values understanding of freedom is.
Yes, and this is, I'm not saying the same. I mean, if I didn't express it well, so I apologize, but I didn't say they are the same as exactly Muslim values. I said there are things which are shared, and there are things which are to be debated and this is part of the democracy, is it? Democracy is not about whatever the authority would say, you take it on board. Is actually to debate within the law, within the rule of law, but also to have your voice and to express your opinion and your objection and to change. That's why I discuss the will and power and can you change, because you are not someone just to submit to whatever comes in society. You are someone that you have values and you will stand up for your values, but you stand up within the rule of law of the country, and and if something, a rule that you don't, is not, we don't think is fair, we don't think is just, then as a citizen and as a Muslim, you are asked to struggle. This is part of struggle of the jihad of nafs, and also the struggle to change towards a better society based on the values you see rights. So in this case, I'm not saying are the same. I'm not saying all of them are universal, because there is a problematic as well in terms of even if we go to human rights and decide and discuss human rights, who decides those human rights, and what cultures have the voice in those kind of. There are things which are universal. There are things that many cultures would agree with. I don't think there are people who will say, come on, we go back to slavery, back again in centuries. This is part of the human dignity. But we may disagree on issues, and if I go to France, and the liberty and freedom there is not to have my scarf on. So if I'm living there, would I take this as something is my value, and therefore I have to take off my scarf because based on equality and based on, no, because I see here the law is oppressive law. And if it is an oppressive law, I will struggle and I will work hard to change that law towards a better law and fairer law. So in this case, it's my duty as well to struggle, but to struggle with within the rules and within society, to be a beneficial kind of citizen to society at large.
Thank you very much. So to make this a bit more practical,
yeah.
Obviously a lot of what we've spoken about so far and what you've spoken about has really been on the principles and the values that drive the framework in which we work in, and we have the education system. So if we translate that into action and to practical, pragmatic realities on the ground,
yeah.
Some of the biggest controversies in recent times have been worthy of discussion. So let's consider, what about the situation of young girls having as part of their uniform the hijab, for example. You'll have seen many of the challenges that have happened, and some of the controversies about whether that's enforced sexualization of young children, etc. You'll be aware of the arguments better than me.
Yes.
How do you see some of these discussions when it comes to young children? Because of course, on the one hand, you can argue, parents always, very often will choose what the young children will wear, but at the same time, and some days the children may not like what the parents have said, and sometimes they will, but at the same time, we often use as the argument otherwise that the young children should have the right to wear the hijab if they choose to. But if it is enforced, how do we deal with that? Because enforcing actually with young children is the case for everything. So all of these types of pragmatic discussions, from a standing back and looking at the values-based discussion that we've talked about previously, how does that come into reality? What do you think about those discussions?
Oh, thank you very much for the practical question. Just we can get concrete. If we talk about individual liberty as one of the fundamental British values, then we are also discussing the different values that people have in society. Parents in society, different parents in society, they enjoy to celebrate their cultural norms and to celebrate their dress and to celebrate with their children and with the loved ones around them. So if it is done without abuse or without pressure, then I don't see any problem for a mother sharing her headscarf with her daughter, a young daughter. But I see the problem when it is forced, when it is because even in Islam, it's not even. I know the difference, but even when they are young, it's not compulsory on them at all. So using the force even against prayer, even which is leave hijab on, even prayer or fasting or which is a pillar of Islam, prayer, you cannot force someone by force to pray, because prayer, or if the hijab is being if it is taken as kind of a symbol to spirituality, then spirituality has to come with freedom, has to come with choice. And if the choice is not there, there is no purposes here. Are we nurturing hypocrisy? Even if in prayer, even if it's a pillar, it's about those conversations is about choice, is about freedom. So I don't see, one of the problems of Islamic education is focusing on the apparent and the physical, and if the inner is not nurtured to make those choices in times of conflict, because this comes with dialogue with society, which is something very important, is for the children to learn to make choices and to freely making those choices to be their own, to own them. Because ibadah, if we are talking about ibadah, that ibadah will not be true ibadah unless there is the inner niyyah, the intention to be as ibadah to the Lord. If it is ibadah to the parents for whatever fasting or prayer or hijab, whatever action we do, then the reward is not there, because that's not ibadah anyway. This becomes a cultural kind of a custom. So if we are talking about ibadah, an essence of ibadah, the ibadah only comes with choice and comes with a niyyah, with an intention, and comes with a will from within. And if we are talking about that, then the discussion of whether are we as parents allowed to force hijab or to force prayer or to, it's well not relevant, because from an Islamic perspective, we cannot do that, because if we are doing it, we are actually doing it educationally. We are nurturing the apparent kind of outside when the inside is not there. And this is, by the Quranic definition, is hypocrisy.
So what's the limit of that? So obviously, if we're saying that it's okay for young children to have the ability or the choice to wear the hijab or to have it. So what you're saying is it cannot be forced. So you're saying it should not be part of the uniform. That's what you're in. That's the first question. I know you'll come to that in a second. But the second bit is, if it can be part of the uniform, or even if it can be, where is the limit of that freedom? Would we say, for example, that young girls who want to almost imitate their parents and their family who all wear the niqab, for example, is that okay for young children who are 6 years old to wear at school? And if not, why not? I mean, if that young girl wants to wear it, and that's from their custom in their family, and why should anyone stop them? So, and if we want to go even further, and you're saying that actually hijab is okay as a part of the uniform for young children. I'm not sure what your response is, but if you do say that that's okay, then could jilbab be part of the uniform, the full, or could niqab be part of the uniform using the exact same arguments? And if not, why not?
If we talk about uniform, let us not only focus on this headscarf. Because if I say hijab, then there are other schools who are using uniform and it's forced on children to use uniform. They don't like to use the suit or to wear this, so they don't feel comfortable in that, and they wear it and they go to school, and the tie they don't like it, they take it off once they get out of the school. So if we go down that road, we are also discussing the current uniform in schools. So what to be accepted, why forcing children to wear this uniform therefore. So there is a certain level that is, if we go to the school and that school has this uniform and the parents have the choice, and if they're not happy and the child is not happy with that school, with that uniform, then change the school. Basically, they have that choice at the front of them. Why choosing if my child is not happy to wear this, and why should I force them to go to that school and wear this uniform that they are not happy with? But for the school to set the standards for their uniform, I think as a Muslim school, as another school has the right to choose and to have the tie and to have that uniform, the Muslim school has the right as well to have this uniform, to have the scarf on. I'm not talking about the niqab because we are going to another circle, I will discuss it, but to have the scarf on, but that scarf should not be, should be negotiated as the other uniform is negotiated with the children in other schools. Is negotiation with, this is part of the uniform. This doesn't mean it's outside of the school. They have to be forced to wear it all the time. It's their choice. Then later on in life, they make the choice they make. But at school, these are the regulations of the school, as any other school uniform. If I go to the niqab, this is more complex. If I don't mean personally, I don't see, means if the school and if the school is for adults and for post-16 say, and they are willingly choosing that and they're happy with that, I don't see any problem with that. However, for the young, I don't think about it at all with the primary, because that's going to, I think, are those I'm not thinking whether it's allowed or not allowed in terms of society. I'm thinking about the consequences on the child, because that child, when they're wearing the niqab, going outside, and they are still not coping within by accepting that niqab and accepting the consequences of that niqab on them. Accepting the consequences means psychological, of bullying, of pressure, of this, and they are primary school. How are they ready psychologically to deal with that when they are adults to handle that kind of a pressure? Especially, you don't find how many girls are in secondary schools wearing the niqab. I'm not talking about Muslim schools. I'm talking in mainstream. So you find we have to consider as wisdom. That's why we say wisdom in action. Means if someone is willing to wear her niqab, I don't have, if this is a free choice for an adult to wear the niqab, then this is part of individual liberty. That is part of democracy and living in this country. That's part of fundamental British values, to not to exclude certain people because those people they don't match the mainstream. However, if I'm taking that to the extent of a niqab in a primary school, I think here is going to the child. It's not even fard for the girl to wear the headscarf, let alone the niqab at that stage. Do they have the mental capacity to handle the pressures on the long term? Are we putting them at risk, not because of the niqab, because of the consequences and the pressure? Therefore, I'm really thinking, I cannot say to you secondary schools should or should not have the niqab as part of their uniform, but I would say to them, for secondary school, obviously, I think is too far. But I think for secondary schools, I would ask the question to those who are in education. I would say, look at the maqsad and the goal you are achieving on the long run. Is it something this girl, when she is going outside and in society, is she able to make those choices, or is her confidence and freedom and spirituality are growing because that's part of the goals of Islamic education? or restricted, that maybe this will push her to the border to leave Islam altogether because of the pressure, let alone to have the hijab. So really, this is a moral responsibility for those decisions to be made, because they have consequences in the lives of those students, and this will be back to those school leaders who decide on that, to think about the consequences and how to handle the challenges, and how to bring the role models, and how to help students through the struggle and tension of wearing that on the long run.
Thank you very much. We really have run out of time, but there was one final question which I'm just going to squeeze in. On the back of the discussions we were having earlier, how do you suggest we oppose the government oppressively forcing these so-called British values on us?
Yeah, I think say first is when I say on us is I can understand, because when they start impose at the beginning, or when they the discourse was us against them, and by David Cameron, when introduced in 2011 and later on imposed after the Trojan horse, and then you find those foreigners who are coming with foreign kind of values that come against our values, and then that comes the British values. So in this case, I understand, but we have as well to be, because the freedom of action is to think, what can I do, rather than as a reaction to what others are doing. So in this case, I think that this is part of the rule of law, is to resist those aspects that you see are oppressive, like stigmatization for certain communities as being not with the democracy, or not with the rule of law, or not with this or that. So I think there is within the law, within, this is when I'm talking about action. This is why I mentioned إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُوا مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ, is to have that confidence, to build. I think part of the Islamic education is to build confidence in the learners as agents of change, and to stand up for their own values, and within the law, and part of the democracy, and part of the practice of the society, to be able to express their values, and in a language that the wider society can understand, and to be able to drive the change for the elements they are not happy with. Because and also to be able to distinguish between, and to recognize the shared values and not only to react back, but to be proactive, they understand themselves from within, they recognize their own values, and they are ready to say, this is where we agree on, this is where we disagree on, and be confident, and to progress, and to work towards change in society within the law.
Thank you very much, and we have run out of time, unfortunately, but as you can see, it was clearly listing lots of questions, so people are obviously very interested in what you'd spoken about. So thank you very much for coming, or virtually coming, and talking to us, and sharing your thoughts. And yes, just a few announcements for everybody else as we finish just now. We will be starting the Ramadan program from next week. The details of that program will be shared by email, WhatsApp, and all the social media as normal. In principle, there will be Quran at the beginning of the program, followed by dua, and then a lecture each day of about 20 minutes. The lectures will be from different people across the period, including Professor Iqbal Asaria, Zahra Al-Alawi, Marzia Hassan, Sheikh Luqman Ali, Dr. Rebecca Masterton, Sheikh Ali Azabajani, Dr. Shuruq Najib, and Sheikh Bahmanpour across the month of Ramadan. We will obviously have the A'mal program, etc., later on in the Layal al-Qadr at the end of the month. The full program will be laid out in the next few days, so please watch out for that. And if you do have any questions about our programs, all online and digital for now, as is obvious and required, please let us know, and you can find out more about our programs on sicken.org.uk. Thank you very much again to to everybody for coming, and Dr. Fella in particular for the talk, and we'll end there. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.